Good evening, and thanks for coming out on this really beautiful evening. Beautiful outdoors, and I'm sure within the next about 5 minutes, you'll agree, spectacularly beautiful indoors. I really want to welcome everybody here, and especially want to welcome Cheryl and the panelists. It's such a great honor to have you here. I've been dreaming about this for a long time, having this type of panel, and here you are, so thank you. This is our 6th year of doing conversations with great leaders, and many of you have been here before and know that we've had spectacular, a great variety from every walk of life, every field, spectacular speakers. And I have to say, tonight is an especially big pleasure for me. It's always a great pleasure and an honor when I get to introduce not just people who are doing unbelievable work in the world, but good friends. So Cheryl and Barbara, and I know if I know the three gentlemen, you would be my friends very quickly. I'm already your admirers, and you would be my friends very quickly as well. But a special welcome to Cheryl and Barbara. It's such an honor to have you here. So for those of you who are here for the first time, first of all, please come back. But I'd also like to welcome you to the Roosevelt House, which is the Public Policy Institute of Hunter College and the historic home of Sarah and Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes, you heard that right, Sarah, Franklin, and Eleanor, mother-in-law. But they all got along well, and it's a terrific house. And to Harold Holzer, who I saw here doing such great work here in public policy and really continuing the great discourse. So Roosevelt House is the Aspen Institute's home here in New York City, and we're at the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund, so thankful to Aspen and to Hunter and to President Jennifer Rabb for allowing us to hold our programs here. Just a little bit about conversations with great leaders in memory of Preston Robert Tisch, my father, my brothers Steve and John and sister-in-law Lizzie started this program about 6 years ago. And as I've said, and as many of you have seen, the programs have been terrific. And tonight, I have great hopes for. We started this program as a way both to honor my father and to feature leaders who are making huge differences in their community by the way they look at their role in helping to build a civil society. In other words, these people on the stage and the people that you have heard have helped to create a world that we all want to be a part of. These leaders represent the values and commitment to public good that reflects the beliefs and the work of the man that is honored by this series, my late father, Preston Robert Tisch, both a businessman and a philanthropist. And tonight's program reflects his belief that business success is not only measured by dollars and cents, but also needs to encompass the well-being of people and the communities where they live. These 5 leaders you'll be hearing tonight have embraced that belief and made it a part of their mission and their organizations. So first, I'd like to introduce Cheryl Dorsey, the moderator of tonight's conversation. Cheryl is the president of Echoing Green, a global organization that finds and supports young entrepreneurs who are intent on solving the world's problems. What do you do in your spare time? Actually, I'll tell you what she does in her spare time. Cheryl also has a medical degree from Harvard and a degree from the Kennedy School, so you probably have lots to do in your spare time, but we met several years ago, and I've been such a great fan of yours, and it's a great pleasure to have you here. Cheryl also started out as a social entrepreneur and helped to launch the Family Van in 1992, a community-based mobile health unit in Boston. She served in 2 presidential administrations and currently serves on several boards, including the Harvard Board of Overseers, the Seed Foundation, and Cheryl was, not surprisingly, named one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report and by the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard's Kennedy School. As you'll hear when Cheryl introduces this evening's panel, these unbelievable, remarkable young leaders have taken on some of the world's biggest problems and challenges, ranging from health equity to making education accessible to at-risk children to providing affordable and efficient energy to underserved communities. And I just on a personal note, I for some reason spent a lot of time driving this weekend, and I kept hearing a Tim McGraw song, "Be Humble and Be Kind," and every time I heard it, I thought, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I have to get that into my remarks tonight because I kept thinking of the 5 of you on the panel who are truly giving millennials a wonderful, wonderful name. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we'll be so inspired by what you have to say, and more importantly, by what you have done and what you have contributed at your very young ages. Cheryl?
Thank you so much, Lori. Now, I'm the only one with a handheld mic, but I project incredibly well. Is it okay if I... So I do need to use this. Okay, all right. Okay, we'll try to make this as conversational as possible with me holding this mic. But Lori, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And just to make sure everyone's in the right place, the panel name tonight is The Business of Doing Good, Young Social Entrepreneurs Changing the World. And before we dive into this very rich and inspiring content, again, I just want to thank you, Lori, you and your family, as well as the Lori Tisch Illumination Fund. Rick, thank you for your leadership as well, and Aspen for putting together this really important program. And I think it's incredibly important that your family, in honor of your father, have provided this very important space for all of us to explore themes of values-based leadership. What does civic engagement mean? What does public service mean? And how diverse leaders like this incredible cadre of young leaders here are confronting some of the most critical issues of the day. And I think we're going to have a really terrific conversation of how they're doing it on multiple fronts. And I probably shouldn't have led with this when I saw all of them upstairs getting ready, but said you guys are in fine company because past speakers of this incredible series included people like Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Julie Taymor, Ariana Huffington, John Lewis. So not to put too much pressure on you folks, but I actually did want to lead with that because I think the fact that we've got 4 millennials, 4 young leaders with us tonight is really indicative not only of their own impressive leadership trajectories, but really emblematic of social entrepreneurship's ascendancy and growing import as a global social movement, as well as a sustainable approach to solving societal problems and creating positive social value. So, you know, if you all had done a Nexus search back in 2001 for the term social entrepreneurship, you would have gotten less than 400 hits of English titles for social entrepreneurship. If you had done that same search in 2011, it would have increased by a factor of 10. So you would have seen about 3,000 articles talking about social entrepreneurship. If each of you pulled out your phone now, you would see 4 million plus hits on social entrepreneurship, just to give you a sense of the trajectory of this field. Similarly, those of us who know young people who are in college, in university, or who have graduated, if you had gone onto a campus back in 2002, there may have been just a handful of courses on social entrepreneurship. By 2008, there were probably closer to 400 professors or researchers in about 35 countries around the world sort of thinking about and talking about social entrepreneurship. I dare say that if any of us, and even here at Hunter, sort of looked around the college and university campus, there would be absolutely either a class on social entrepreneurship or an extracurricular. So both the pedagogy and extracurricular nature of this topic is now completely immersed on most university campuses. So what about this phenomenon of social innovation, social entrepreneurship? It's multifaceted, it is complex, but given tonight's topic, I will say that social entrepreneurship is propelled in large measure by major generational shifts that are happening before us. So we've got 4 incredible examples of millennial leaders who by virtue, by the way they were raised, by virtue of being raised in the midst of technology, they are much more focused on others. They are much more tolerant. They are much more communitarian. And even things of looking at how they donate to charity. They donate at a much higher rate than certainly our generation. And increasingly, they are starting to lay down a marker around what their world should look like, including the global economy. They are already beginning to reset expectations in terms of not only of how businesses operate, but why they operate and how they source their operations. And we'll get into some of that as we talk to these terrific young people. So let me just give you a couple of definitions of social entrepreneurship. And I say a couple because social entrepreneurship as a field of endeavor is still relatively young. It's about 35 to 40 years. So there is still a myriad of definitions as the semantics of the field are being negotiated and navigated. But you might hear some people talk about social innovators as individuals with innovative solutions to society's most pressing social problems. So from a social sector actor perspective, it gives you a sense of sort of the things and the issues that these leaders are confronting. But just as entrepreneurs change the way that business works, social entrepreneurs too act as change agents for society. That's another one. Well, how do they operate in the world? There's this incredible combination of passion for a social mission, combined with a business-like discipline, sort of this watchword of innovation, which we'll talk more about, as well as a determination and passion that is commonly associated with, for example, high-tech innovators in Silicon Valley. So those are just a few of the different definitions of social innovation and social entrepreneurship and how they're making their mark on the world. And there are so many ways we could slice and dice this conversation, but I want to make sure we have ample time for you all to ask questions of these incredible young leaders. But I think we'll bucket the conversation in three lanes. I think first we'll start with each of their leadership journeys, what we at Echoing Green talk about, the moment of obligation. How did they come to do the work that they do, and why do they do what they do? Then we will shift into maybe some more of the technical aspects of the work that they do. So what do they mean by social innovation? What are the theories of change of their organizations and how they do our work? And then I think last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about how they are showing up as leaders as millennials. And I think that'll be a wonderful way to then kick off the Q&A section. So in the order that we find these young leaders, I'm going to start with you, Kassaga. Can you tell us a little bit about your path, your leadership journey?
Oh, thank you so much. And I think tonight is really particularly humbling and special night for me. I mean, we are under the Roosevelt House, someone that I studied in geography. And so I was born in rural western Uganda in a small village. I went to school barefooted 10 miles from home. I attended a school where it was under corrugated iron roof. My first class was writing in the sand. But I was searching for an education. When I would come home after those 10 miles when I'm tired and I'm struggling with doing my homework, my mother would pull her pen and show me and say, "My little man, if you believe in the power of this pen, love people and work hard, nothing will stand in your way." My mother was a primary school teacher. She died when I was 6 years old. And so from there, I find myself the only survivor of a family of 7 by the age of 10, by my 10th birthday. And I had graduated out of primary school in rural western Uganda as the best student in the 4 schools that we had in my county. I couldn't afford high school. So my choices was either drop out or figure it out. And so luckily I had a grandmother who encouraged me that we can find another option. 3 months later, I found myself at the door of the well-guarded state house of my president asking for a scholarship to attend high school. Luckily enough, the president's wife, the first lady to this day, gave me a scholarship to high school, and I attended a high school in Kampala with the sons of the elites and the daughters of the well-educated. 10 years later, I was able to cross paths with an amazing family from the US, halfway across the world, who believed that if we could give this young man a college education, any opportunity will be open for him. And so I find myself in the United States, and I think it's that journey and that belief that in the power of the pen and the power of the opportunity that was given to me that brought me to Global Health Corps when I had the advertisement of young people interested in changing their communities in global health. And so there I was excited to join my fellow brothers and sisters, not only from the US, but from Zambia, from Malawi, from Congo, from Rwanda and Burundi, to work together really to begin to chip away on some of these challenges that I saw inflict my family and most of my community all the time. And so later on, I again joined the Aspen New Voices Fellowship because I really thought of how do we tell our story as Africans? Most of the time, the story of Africans has been told by others, and sometimes not so for us, but mostly goes against us. And so there, I joined another group of people where we started writing our stories and telling our stories with the belief that maybe with the tools that I've been given, with the opportunities that I've been given, I could write a different narrative for Africa. And it's that same dream that took me away from the comfort zone of my liking in Uganda, and I went halfway across the world again to India, and I spent time in the classrooms, in the communities, of seeing the struggles of other people that live in a different country, in a different continent. And there I saw the triumphs, the struggles and the triumphs of other people and how they defined their education and how they defined their own narrative. And I came back home with that heart and that feeling, and I started Teach for Uganda because I believe to this day that if every child in Uganda is given an opportunity for an excellent education, they can thrive. Probably they will do much more better than what my generation, the next generations could do. Just to leave you with a little bit of context, Uganda probably has the youngest population in the world today. We are 80% below the age of 30, 80% of my population. 50% is below 15 years old. We have half the country in school, but 7 out of 10 or 70% of our children drop out before they complete primary school. So the challenge, the crisis that we are working on right now with Teach for Uganda and my fellow colleagues is really to ensure that could these young people stay in school, and if they don't, what would our nation look like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now? So
Thank you, Kassaga. We'll now move to Barbara. You know, you mentioned that you were a Global Health Corps Fellow, so this is a perfect segue to introduce Barbara. Please tell us more.
I was on a panel with James before in Aspen, and I never said a word the entire time. I just stared at him and cried. So I'm going to try to do a better job this time. Good, I might. So I got involved in global health accidentally. I mean, I'm going to cry now just because I get to sit with James and sit with Lonnie, who's the Global Health Corps alum. I don't know many of y'all. I'm really wearing my emotions on my sleeve, so just bear with me. But I got involved in global health because I was very obsessed with problem solving when I was younger, and I was very obsessed with fairness. I'm a twin, so I think that has something to do with why I'm obsessed with fairness. But when I was in college, I was studying architecture, and I was on this path that I thought I would be on, that I'd always known I was going to be on since I was younger. I was very creative, and I loved designing things. And I had a really fancy summer internship in New York City. And I was lucky enough to take 2 weeks off of my summer internship. At the time, my dad was president of the United States. I'll name drop a little bit. And the United States was launching a program called PEPFAR, which all of you are responsible for. It's the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And at the time, if you were HIV positive living in the United States, it was a chronic illness. You could get the drugs that you needed to survive. But if you were living in a developing country, it was really quite impossible to get drugs, no matter what social status you were. And so I was lucky to take 2 weeks off of this internship for the launch of this program, which would provide free antiretroviral drugs to five countries on the continent of Africa. And when we landed, I was just so, I mean, as cliche as it is, struck by the fact that there were hundreds of people waiting in the streets for drugs that if they had been in the United States, they could have had any time. And I was so mind blown by how unfair that was. It wasn't that we didn't have the medical research. It wasn't that we didn't have the science. It wasn't that there weren't companies already making these drugs. You just couldn't get them if you were born in the wrong place. And so I came back to the United States, and I dropped all of my classes in architecture, and I started taking global health classes. And I wasn't really sure where my career was going to go, but I just couldn't live knowing that we had the tools to keep people alive, and yet millions of people were dying from preventable and treatable illnesses. And flash forward a few years later, I ended up finding my own path. I worked for UNICEF in Botswana and worked for Red Cross Children's Hospital in South Africa. And I moved back to the United States, and my sister called me, and she was sitting next to two guys. And she said, I'm sitting with these two strangers. You need to meet them. They're the only people that I've ever heard say, why isn't there a program like Teach for America, but applied to global health? And you're the one other person I've ever heard say that. And so I talked to these guys on the phone, and 2 weeks later, we spent the weekend together in Baltimore, and we wrote a business plan for Global Health Corps. And really, our idea was James or Lonnie. Our idea was, how can we bring incredibly talented, creative, passionate young people to a field that needs more solutions? We already have the medical solutions, we already have the education, and yet we're not doing enough. We need creative systems thinkers to serve people better. And so that's what we do every day. We competitively recruit young leaders to serve for a year solving health issues in the United States and then in 5 countries in East and Southern Africa. And throughout the year, they first of all grow immensely because they're problem solving in gray area every single day. It's not an easy field to work in. And they go through our curriculum that is very focused on advocacy and policy change and using your voice and systems thinking, so that this is just the first step in a career in social change. And we've been really lucky to work so far with 600 exceptional young leaders. We'll add 140 more in 2.5 weeks. And they were selected out of 14,000 applications. So we're getting pretty great talent because, as Cheryl mentioned, young people want to solve problems, and we see them as the solution in doing so.
Thank you, Barbara. Lonnie?
Thank you. I was born in a small town called Milford, Maine, and I'm often asked how a kid from northern Maine found himself working in shanty towns and compounds in Lusaka, Zambia. And the truth is that for most of my life, global health or service in general was not a priority. Growing up, I loved athletics, and I played everything, baseball, basketball, hockey, but above all, I fell in love with football. And I often laugh now when I tell people that when I arrived in college, my #1 goal was to become our school's all-time leading rusher. It's safe to say my life went in a completely different direction. But it's ironic that what was perhaps the top moment in my athletic career is what pushed me in that direction. I had been honored by the National Football Foundation and College Football Hall of Fame and got to spend time in New York City with the sports stars I had spent my whole life idling. And when I returned to school, I just realized how unhappy I was. I had just had the taste of the life I'd always dreamed of, and I wasn't at all happy. And I reflected on my day-to-day life. I realized just how selfish it had become. I would wake up, go to football meetings, have classes, go to practice, do homework, and work out. And everything I did in one way or another was for me. I studied hard to get good grades, I practiced to win football games, and I'd work out to play better. And by chance or fate, I had an opportunity that summer to, in 2011, to work with faculty from Harvard Medical School, researching voluntary counseling and testing for HIV/AIDS among orphans and vulnerable children attending low-income community schools. And for me, this was a really profound experience. I had never left the US before up to this point, and I was now working with children in the poorest compound in Lusaka. And I saw a lot of challenges over the summer, but the one that struck me the most was health. I, like most people in this room, believe that every child has a right to health. And I had seen that this was not at all the case. 33% of kids that I was working with were stunted. 40% were suffering from some sort of treatable illness, schistosomiasis, worm infestation, diseases that may not be life-threatening, but they're mortgaging these children's future. But I also met incredible teachers and health workers who had dedicated their lives to helping these children. And I became convinced that if there was a way to connect schools where the children were attending, in Zambia 90% of kids enroll in school, with health centers, and build safety nets for these children, that we could have an incredible impact on their health. And so I returned to the US and immediately quit football and dedicated my life to this idea. And I'm incredibly proud that 5 years later I was able to convince a group of board members like Frank Strasburger, who's here today, to join the cause. And we, over the past year and a half, with support from Global Health Corps and tutelage and everything I learned from that fellowship, were able to expand to 50 schools and welcome in 12,000 children into the program. with goals over the next 12 months to move to 3 new communities and expand over 30,000 children. And so it's, we've seen the power of grassroots movement, of working with local expertise, and for me it's just been an absolute privilege every day to be able to work with the stakeholders and local community members. So I feel incredibly lucky for that.
Thank you, Lonnie. Last but not least, Donnel, please tell us a little bit about your journey.
Pass. Next question. So my name is Donnel Baird. I grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, back in the early 80s when it was still a terrible neighborhood, not like it is now. My parents were immigrants from South America, and we were poor. But my parents pushed for me to be well educated. I tested into prep school in Atlanta, and then Duke. But when I graduated, I wanted to become a community organizer because there were lots of kids who I had grown up with who just didn't have the set of parents that I had or have the kinds of opportunities that I had. And it was really important to me to kind of give something back to them because of the privilege of this great education that I received. So I became a community organizer in Brownsville, Brooklyn, which is where Mike Tyson grew up. It's New York City's poorest neighborhood, still, poorest census tract. So I was there for 3 years. The state government spends $1 million per city block on 17 blocks in Brownsville to incarcerate residents of that block. HIV rates in Brownsville are over 20%. And I think real unemployment rates are something like 65 to 70%. And this is in New York City, even when the city is doing great. So I was there for 3 years, and it was terrible. I mean, being a community organizer and kind of knocking on doors in the public housing complexes in the poorest neighborhood in New York City was not pleasant. And there were many days where I was not able to make it out of my office to do my job because I was just kind of overwhelmed with how terrible everything was. But there was a shooting. I was visiting a local elementary school, and all of the kindergartners and first graders had these brightly colored backpacks, and they were released from elementary school that afternoon, and we were kind of standing around, and we heard a couple pops. All of the kids kind of hit the sidewalk. They knew what was going on. I didn't. I thought like a car had backfired or something like that. So I looked around and I saw these like brightly colored backpacks for all these kids who had hit the turf. And I just thought that was really sad that a bunch of 5-year-olds kind of knew the drill on what to do when they heard something that sounded like a shooting. And I thought that the kind of community organizing and pushing for kind of public policy or improving the educational system wasn't going to bring about the kind of social change that I was interested in. It was just too slow, it just wasn't going to work. So I got super interested in trying to create local jobs for the young parents in that neighborhood. And because I'd become an environmentalist while I was in college, it was important to me that those be green jobs, right? That those be jobs that added to environmental sustainability instead of detracting from it. So at the time I decided that the best thing I could do was to join Barack Obama's campaign for the presidency. I thought that he would carry South Carolina and become a great vice president to Hillary, which not good at politics. But once we won, there was, if you think back to 2009, there was this huge opportunity in the stimulus to invest something like $80 billion in green energy, and there's about $8 billion that was earmarked for investing in low and moderate income communities across the country, and we were going to retrain and rehire all of the construction workers who'd been laid off in the real estate collapse and were causing the 8% unemployment rates. We were going to train them and give them green jobs by partnering with utility companies and Wall Street, as well as federal stimulus dollars to create kind of these green municipal bonds. It was going to be awesome. So some of it worked, some of it didn't. Maybe I'm doing something wrong here. But some of it worked, some of it didn't. But what was difficult was we had created this great program in the District of Columbia, the nation's capital, where the mayor had committed $20 million a year for 5 years to train and hire ex-offenders from the city's poorest zip codes in green jobs, and they were going to green all of the buildings in low-income DC. And it was great. We had lots of community events. We trained and hired lots of people. It was amazing until the stimulus money ran out. And then I had to look everyone in the eye, all of these workers that we trained, and they had living wages, they'd had health care for themselves and their family, and we had to lay them off because we weren't sure how to continue their employment. So for me, that was the moment of commitment to try and figure out a sustainable private sector methodology to creating jobs in inner cities that reduced carbon emissions, improved public health outcomes, and saved on energy costs for residents of low-income neighborhoods. And to that end, I started BlocPower. We are a greedy for-profit. We're a public benefits corporation, but we are a venture capital-backed for-profit that is seeking to use the capital markets to get institutional investment in American inner cities to create large municipal bonds.
Thank you. So at the beginning of this talk, Laura, you said, well, how do I spend my time? To be inspired and motivated every day by this next-gen talent, you all just have to hear their stories and sort of feel their passion and their energy to see why, folks like me who run fellowship programs are so lucky. And you heard sort of a through line through all of their remarks, fellowships, talent. A number of years ago, Thomas Friedman previewed that we are now in an age of talent. And I believe that to be the case. And you hear things about Kassaga's journey and Lonnie's journey as Global Health Corps Fellows, or Barbara and Donnel as social entrepreneurs who are Echoing Green Fellows. You're starting to see these various and sundry programs that recognize that talent is evenly distributed while opportunity is not. So you start to build this human capital superhighway that are getting these next-gen leaders on board and out front to be the solutionists that we need them to be in the 21st century. So I think this is just sort of a taste of how these young leaders are really sort of shaking things up and disrupting. And I want to move on to the very hallmarks of what it means to be social entrepreneurs, to be social innovation leaders. And I will go back, and we'll start again with you, Kassaga, and ask you to talk about your work as co-founder and CEO as Teach for Uganda. Tell us a little bit more about the model, why you think it is innovative and disrupted, and how do you think about your impact strategy? And we'll have each one of you do that in kind.
Thank you, Cheryl. And of course, as I told you earlier, after spending some time in India and after really reflecting on my own journey and what made me even just be who I am today, I really looked at many things: the aspects of healthcare, the aspects of mentorship, the aspects of the support, the incredible support that I got, not only from my grandmother who stood by me, but from my school teachers, for example. When my father, for example, was ailing with HIV and AIDS in the 90s, it was a very difficult time to be at home for me. So I kind of found refuge at school, and where my science teacher and math teacher told me, you can stay here if you don't feel like you want to see your father go through what he's going through, which I'm not going to mention here, while my grandmother was there. So I saw those pieces of support that made me who I am, that I didn't go crazy or I didn't drop out of school. And so by going back home, and I returned to Uganda, and I saw 7 out of 10 kids were dropping out, and there's still a huge number of children that are walking to school those miles, and they get there and there is hardly a teacher or a mentor, right? And then when you step up a little bit, Acumen would always tell us, you hear that you step on the balcony a little bit and can kind of take like the wide view of the situation in Uganda. You have a country of 37 million. You have, a government that is trying to do things right for the most part. And then you have members of parliament who are 458, and each is now asking for a 200 million Uganda shillings in compensation for vehicles, which is about $60,000, and they are budgeting about $3 per child in classroom per year. So you think about $60,000. I'm going to put it in dollars. $60,000 in only vehicle compensation, without talking about housing and fuel and their salaries. And then here you have children who they are budgeting for, a primary school child who they are budgeting $3 per year, right? So where we are right now, I feel in Uganda, it's a crisis of leadership. And so what Teach for Uganda really aims at goes to the top university in our country, top universities, 5 of them, and we select the top graduates, second upper and high upper, and we train them in this idea of moral leadership, the idea of adaptive leadership. How do you manage a classroom? And then our idea is that we also know that the only foundation that they, not the only, one of the major foundation is by understanding the complexities, we call it the education inequity puzzle, the complexity that surround a child to be able to succeed like they have succeeded at their university. If they can comprehend that, because some of them come from very privileged backgrounds, where they probably, like what Lonnie was saying, like they only know like being driven to a James school, it's James Cambridge, it's a private school. So by bringing them to the classroom and they really understand the complexities that surround their brothers and sisters, we hope that we are developing a committed generation of leaders who are going to enter, a municipal council, for example, and make better decisions on what education that these kids will get. Policymakers, for example, school leaders, principals, because teachers alone cannot solve this challenge. The challenge is the challenge of leadership. You need, committed bureaucrats who are going to make better decisions. You need policymakers who are going to pass laws that are actually going to affect these children. You need also school principals and leaders and also teachers and parents who actually can support their kids to learn. So it's a round effort, and I think it can only be done by leaders who understand that challenge very well. And so what we are aiming at for us at Teach for Uganda, the long-term goal is creating this pipeline of leaders that every year after year, they are going to the classroom, they are spending 2 years, and they are getting it, they are understanding it. What we have, I'll quickly finish, we have something that we call a day in the life of a child. And my co-founder and I, we just started this organization. We took a journey each in the day of a child. And so my co-founder followed this young girl called Margaret, and Margaret is 7 years old. She walks from her village to school 15 kilometers, that's about 9 miles, and then goes back those 9 miles. One time she came to school that same day. In her classroom, there was no teacher. And Margaret said, so we asked Margaret, so what do you normally do? It was raining. She was drenched in the rain. And she says, sometimes I go sit in my friend's classroom hoping that there is a teacher there. And if that teacher is not there, I normally walk back home. And so we know that we can't solve the entire crisis of teachers, but we can support the government. We can create these leaders who will think about the child like Margaret. Because when they spend a day in the life of Margaret, I don't think that when they sit in their parliament, they will really pass a policy where they say, I want $200 million or $60,000 in my vehicle compensation so I could drive, rather than pass a better policy to help Margaret get a quality education.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question? So you have co-founded Teach for Uganda, which is part of the Teach for All network, which was sort of an offshoot of Teach for America. What was it that attracted you to the Teach for All network, and what is specific to the context of Uganda and what you and your co-founder are building?
That is a great question. So Pat, we are working we are working to be partners with Teach for All, but the model is innovated and really inspired by Teach for All. And Teach for America. When I saw what Teach for India was doing, when I spent in the classrooms in Mumbai and Pune, and I got to see in Bangalore where I was working, and I saw the transformation, the leaders who are coming from the corporate sector. Actually, we had engineers in India who are living, Accenture, for example, and IBM coming to the classroom. There's a gentleman named that I never get him out of my head, who saw that in this community in Mumbai, because it's in a slum area and the kids weren't able to access like the quality science classrooms and laboratories, so he went on to start this kind of like a lab in a box thing where he created laboratories so that kids in those neighborhoods also can have access. So that's when it ticked for me. So when I went back to Uganda, I innovated on that model. What we do today, we place actually, instead of one, I know Teach for America places one, we place two, which comes from Global Health Co as well, which is because we realize that the two actually are stronger. One is in English, one is in mathematics. And the other thing, what they do is they work with the teachers. Like on every weekend, we hope that they can have this relationship where they can share their challenges in the classroom, but also like the learned lessons with others. And then something also that we innovated on it that we hope to achieve when we have the financial wherewithal is that every person who graduates at the end of their fellowship, they have, and this also something from GHC in a way, that they have a completion award that actually tells them that, thank you, what you've done for your country and for your community is great. Now take this award and look at the education puzzle or the challenge that happened in your country. Where can you invest this again into your community? Or if you want to take it and get a graduate degree in education, you can go ahead and do that.
Thank you so much, Kassaga. Barbara, please tell us more. One of the things I've always loved about your work and your vision is sort of this intersection of social innovation and social movement building. Tell us more about your scale proposition and how you think about impact.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, I think that Lonnie and James speak really well to our scale proposition. What we are doing at Global Health Corps is seeding the field of global health with really great talent. Cheryl mentioned this before, but I mean, our intervention is really smart, committed people. That's what we do. And so what we do every day is partner with ministries of health or nonprofits like Partners in Health Care, Clinton Health Access Initiative, who tell us what their biggest gaps are. And then we competitively recruit young leaders who are 30 and under. We're very generation specific. I'm thrilled that you called me a millennial, because I think I'm like, you know, I aged out of Global Health Corps. And 30 seemed old when I was younger, and then it wasn't anymore. But we specifically work with fellows that are 30 and under because we're trying to grab great talent who are closer to the beginning of their careers. And our fellows, the Minister of Health in Rwanda calls our fellows business as unusual, which we love because they're not steeped in things have to be done this way because they've always been done this way. And so they're willing to look, as James said, get on the balcony and look at the problem from a different lens. And so what they do is every day work within a Ministry of Health or one of our partner organizations solving the issues that those organizations have. And then throughout the year, it's essentially a wall-less leadership development institute. They go through our curriculum throughout the year. We partner with Yale University for the first 2.5 weeks, and then every quarter we bring our fellows together so that they can problem solve with each other on the issues that they're addressing and go through our curriculum focused on resiliency, empathy, commitment to results, et cetera. So it's learning while doing. It's very 21st century learning, I would say. But we see our impact not only in what our fellows do in their year. They work every day helping our partner organizations achieve their mission, so reaching more people. But more importantly, 97% of them stay in the field of global health and social justice. And so we are seeing that we're seeding the field with talent. And now we have a few of our alums sitting over here. I have to give them a shout out, Mina and Sonia. Now we're working equally as closely with our alums as we are with our fellows because we have 600 alums, and that is much stronger than 140 fellows, and it represents real strength in numbers. And so it could not be more gratifying for us to go into meetings and we sit down and the person that we're meeting with is now a Global Health Corps alum and they're in a senior leadership position. And that's where we will see our change. It's not only keeping this really great talent pipeline in the field of global health, but as our alums rise through the ranks and either end up running great organizations or like James and Lonnie starting their own, seeing challenges in the field and building solutions themselves, that is how we will see scale. And just to give you a little bit of a glimpse into what our fellows are like, they are like James and Lonnie, and they're very different than what you would think a global health leader is. Because of the complexity of global health issues, we don't typically recruit folks with health backgrounds. 16 of our fellows have been architects, and they're working in Rwanda, and they're working on tuberculosis, which is an airborne illness. So if anyone in this room has TB, all of us have been exposed. And you can imagine what happens when someone has TB and they go to a health center to get diagnosed. Everyone in the health center is exposed to tuberculosis, and people will leave a health center more sick than when they got there. And so our fellows that are architects have been working with an organization called MASS and Partners in Health in the Ministry of Health in Rwanda to change the way that air flows throughout health centers so that tuberculosis and other infectious diseases won't spread. And that's really exciting to us because bringing great talent to solve problems isn't innovative, but bringing different ways of looking to solving problems can lead to innovative solutions. And so we're just really moved every day by what our fellows are doing and now what our alums are doing.
Thank you, Barbara. That's terrific. And as one of your alums, Lonnie, can you talk more about your work as founder and president of Healthy Kids, Brighter Future? You touched on this a little bit where you talked about your scale proposition, but what I love in part about your work is that it's evidence-based work, and it's such a disruptive model of how you use the school system to deliver healthcare. Tell us more about that model and your thinking, as well as your impact proposition.
Well, first, to start, As an organization, we started by looking for the gap between need and the provision of service. Something James touched on earlier, in Uganda, like Zambia, many low-income developing countries, nearly 50% of the population is less than 15 years of age, which creates an incredible opportunity to create a new citizenry that can be productive, but it also will make development that much more difficult if we miss this window of opportunity. And for us, we had seen a lot of health programs that were focused on under 5 health, as that's incredibly important, and on adolescent health. But it left this gap for kids between the age of 5 and 14, where many of them were marginalized. And by the time they grew up and were in adolescence, a lot of them were already marginalized and missed. And in many ways, the success of the Under 5 program created so many more challenges of what do you do with the survivors? How do you help them graduate into adulthood as productive citizens? And for us, the idea was connecting schools where we knew children were already attending. In Zambia, about 90% of children enroll at some point in school. Only about 1/3 of those children will complete the cycle. But it gives us an opportunity, an entry point to reach those children. And the beauty of what we do is that it's built into existing infrastructure. And we capitalize on schools that already exist and health centers that already exist, but we build their capacity through training teachers through a 10-day training to be basic frontline health workers, really tapping into the model of community health workers, where we're able to provide them with basic skills so they can be boots on the ground and create a safety net for these children. In Zambia, in the low-income communities, it's very common that for when a child reaches 7, 8, 9 years old, the responsibility for their health falls on them. And we wanted to move the onus of the responsibility for their health from the child to the school. So we also trained administrators and clinic members to make sure that when a child is sick, that the responsibility is for the school to make sure that they're able to access care at the local health facility. And so we use these teachers as a link between the school and the health center so that they can provide health education, they can organize the schools when we do outreach, we provide children with proven cost-effective interventions, deworming, vitamin A supplementation, vaccinations, which have been proven to decrease school absenteeism and to improve development. We also build referral systems so that when a child's sick, they're able to access care. We saw at the Nombe Health Center, where we piloted our model, a tripling in the number of school children that were now accessing care from a year after we started. And 49 of our 50 partner schools reported anecdotally a decrease in absenteeism. And we started today inline of a year-long control study with the Harvard School of Public Health, so we'll have more metrics to be able to prove what we're doing. But in many ways, our goal, our end goal is to work ourselves out of a job. We're building a model that we believe can work in other parts of Lusaka, Zambia, and developing countries. And so we're continuing for us to replicate it, to evaluate it, with the goal of eventually being able to go to larger foundations, organizations, ministries of health, and show them the benefits of this model so that we don't have to ourselves improve our capacity, replicate, and duplicate efforts, but rather we're proving this model that can then be leveraged by other organizations and be taken to a much larger scale than we ever could. And so for right now, our goal is to eventually reach 100,000 children. We think that's a critical point where we can create a movement in Lusaka, where we'll have this paradigm shift where guardians and children and community members don't just view teachers as educators, but also agents of good health. And to have that shift where teachers are also seen as being able to create this social safety net and to build the demand from within communities so that it's a more durable, lasting change.
That's fantastic. And, interestingly, it is often hard for earlier stage social enterprises to build in the sorts of performance measurement systems and evaluation. How did you do it from the very beginning, and how did you sort of partner with Harvard on your evidence-based metrics?
Well, the reason I first traveled to Zambia, I very fortuitously went to a conference, and the guest speaker was a doctor from Harvard Medical School, who was also an alumni from Bowdoin College. And so that was the initial connection, and he became my mentor and was able to network with other members both within Harvard Medical School and the Harvard School of Public Health and capitalize on their resources and expertise. And in a lot of ways, the lack of programs on school-aged children create a great opportunity for them. There's very little literature on the health status of kids between the age of 5 and 14. So for them, it's an incredible insight into this marginalized population. And for us, it's a great way to build in, to make sure our programs are data-driven and build in formal evaluations into our programs.
It's such a great illustration. We often talk about social innovators as resource magnets, as sticky leaders, really good at sort of aggregating resources, and that's a great illustration of that, Lonnie. Thank you. Donnel, again, last but certainly not least, you are a really wonderful example of young leadership that is taking on triple bottom line business. So looking not only for social return on investment, but also environmental return on investment and financial return on investment. Can you talk about BlocPower, how you set about raising blended capital and your experiences as an impact investment business?
Sure. So we talked about my dramatic failure working on the Obama administration stimulus, and so it was really important to me to try and combine the pieces together in such a way that we could create this kind of freestanding green energy industry in American inner cities that can employ tons of people and create a lot of value. And oh, by the way, create a constituency to participate in climate change conversations that's very valuable nationally and internationally, implementing Paris, Kyoto, et cetera. So I enrolled in Columbia Business School, and there's this Greek myth about this like Prometheus, and he stole fire, and then there's like an eagle that comes to eat his liver every day, and then his liver grows back. Nobody reads myths anymore. I used to love it. So that's what business school was like for me. It was horrible. It was like an eagle just gouging my liver out. I didn't know what a stock was when I started. I was a community organizer, right? It was terrible. But the goal was to learn enough about finance at Columbia Business School to be dangerous, and I was, yeah, and so I was fortunate to win an Echo and Green Fellowship while in business school, and that really gave me permission to kind of experiment with some of the new structures. I think we've talked about how we as millennials believe that there's, new structures and new ways of doing things that can kind of break out of an old model of, are you here to maximize profit in your fiduciary obligation, or are you a nonprofit, right, where it's tougher to scale? And when I was working on the stimulus, part of our coalition was a set of labor union pensions who control $7 trillion in assets, and there's about $100 billion worth of pension funds who wanted to invest their labor unions' pension funds in the green economy, right, to scale it, but their firms would not allow them to because their broker said, this doesn't meet our fiduciary obligation. Like, you guys can sue us, your workers can sue us. Investing for environmental and social impact is not, legal. And so in business school, there's a new corporate structure that you can use, right? And being part of the Echo and Green community with other entrepreneurs who are experimenting with these new corporate structures was really great for me. And so what we did is we incorporated as a public benefits corporation, which allows us as management of a for-profit startup to have a fiduciary obligation, but also to have the opportunity as management to maximize environmental benefit or economic development or job creation, so that our venture capital investors cannot sue me if I choose to install solar hot water heating systems instead of natural gas systems, for example, in a set of projects, right? Because I want to maximize carbon emission reduction instead of financial returns, which would be the natural gas investment. So that structure has given us a lot of latitude. It's raised questions. I mean, some of our investors initially were, what the heck is this? What is a public benefits corporation? Why would I, place my equity capital in your firm if you're telling me up front that you intend to why don't you just register as a nonprofit? But I think as millennials, and even inside the venture capital firms, there's lots of folks who want these new structures, and we're able to kind of relate to us as the entrepreneur and kind of wrap their heads around it. So in effect, our model for scaling is that of a traditional technology startup, right? Like Uber or Facebook or anything else. And some of our investors were early investors in Uber and Facebook, right? And that's their investment thesis, right? Massive technological scale, take over everything. And the question for us is how do you embed in your corporate day-to-day operations social and environmental impact? For us, we focus on buildings in American inner cities. Because these buildings are so inefficient, because they haven't had access to capital for 30 to 40 years to do basic maintenance. They overconsume energy, they overproduce carbon emissions, they are a burden for the residents who own and operate them, and a lot of our clients, 30–40% of their total operating budget every year goes to the utility company to cover energy costs. That's money that could be reinvested in social programs or senior lunches or after-school programs or jobs. So what we do is we have developed an engineering algorithm, and our chief engineer is in the Bay Area in a few minutes with IBM Watson, the supercomputer that beat the guy in Jeopardy, and we have a partnership with them where Watson analyzes satellite imagery of buildings in inner cities that we send to them, and we have this algorithm that we developed that allows us to quickly analyze the kind of carbon emissions potential savings in each building, and to model what kind of debt that building could repay based on the reduction in energy consumption. So by lowering their energy bills, customers are able to repay capital out of some of the money that they save from their energy bill. And so the question for us, and how do you scale, is how do you do whatever every tech company does, which is extend that model to Detroit and to Chicago, in San Francisco and Oakland, which is exactly what we're trying to do. The social impact part of it is the same kind of aggregation and project aggregation, kind of bundling that institutional investors like Goldman Sachs need to see in order to make kind of large-scale institutional investments, right? They need to see 1,000 buildings in one investment, not just one. That allows you to create a ton of jobs. And so you can get back to the central idea for me of hiring ex-offenders to green these buildings because you have a sustainable source of investment capital that's going to recycle and be repaid. So that's how we think about scale. We're very excited about two projects. I'll end with this since we're in the home of FDR. FDR, because the utility companies in the 30s and 40s were not willing to provide electricity, they weren't willing to provide transmission lines to much of rural America, FDR created rural electric cooperatives, right, where the farmers and other residents of rural America kind of owned equity shares in kind of a new corporation that owned their local utility company. And so these cooperatives still exist, and people still meet and kind of vote and kind of run their local utility company. And so in Brownsville, Brooklyn, this really poor neighborhood where I was a community organizer, we've done the same thing. We've created an electric cooperative that's owned by low-income residents of this neighborhood. They own 51% of it. Con Edison is going to own 49% of it. There's a bunch of solar panels on top of a lot of the buildings in the neighborhood. There's batteries. There's energy efficiency. And they're going to jointly operate this new corporation and micro utility company, or a microgrid, in Brownsville, Brooklyn for the next 20 years. And so to go full circle, that is how we think about scale and how to replicate clean energy projects in inner cities that create jobs and reduce carbon emissions. And by greening the buildings, you create a ton of awesome health impacts, which you can actually monetize by selling to the hospitals. Because you're lowering asthma rates by greening buildings, there's less visits to the emergency room for local kids, for example, which is a cost savings. And so by being thoughtful about how these projects kind of impact health services, energy services, utility companies, that's the way we hope to create a sustainable industry.
I.e. social impact bonds, pay for performance,
exactly.
That sort of thing. It's fascinating,
Exactly.
Really fascinating.
Exactly.
Donnel, one of the things, is I love so many things about the social innovation space, but it's been real, certainly intergenerational learning for folks like me who have been in this sector for a long time. 10 years ago, Echoing Green as a social impact first funder predominantly saw not-for-profit ideas. And beginning in 2006, about 15% of our applicant pool were proposing double bottom line or triple bottom line businesses or hybrid enterprises. It's now 50% of our applicant pool, and it's only going to continue to grow. So it's been a real learning experience for us as a funder, recognizing that this is our new normal. So what sorts of financial tools do we have to provide to next-gen leaders like Donnel and others to service their work and their vision? So it's been an incredible learning opportunity for us, now offering not just philanthropic dollars, but also no-cost debt thinking about other instruments to offer high-impact leaders like Donnel. We're going to open it up for questions in just a minute or so. I just want to quickly run down and ask very quickly, as social innovators, what are one or two hard-fought, hard-won lessons learned for you all? Because you all are amazing and inspiring, but this is hard. I mean, this is grueling, sort of eat your liver kind of work where you're just in it, and it is hard every day. Please share with us just one or two lessons that you have gained along the way.
Wow. To be able to take care of yourself when you know that it's really can get hard. Quickly for me, working with our government, which we must have actually on board, and we must have partnered with us to be able to scale, because as Lonnie mentioned, we want to work ourselves out of a job. Education should be a human right and should be all our children's right. And so bring them on board to be able actually to think about them eventually seeing Teach for Uganda as the only major way we could train our teachers and actually have them mentor the kids the way we would want all our children to be mentored has been the most challenging. Not mentioning, where some offices where you go and you're asked for a bribe and direct, and that is really challenging. You have to go and take a night to just reflect on that when you are trying to ensure that these kids who are getting $3 a year compared to someone who is getting $60,000, and you're like, now I'm being asked for a bribe to prepare our generational, the next generation of our people. So I think for me, what I'm learning is really take some steps back to get mentorship, thanks to Barbara Bush and many others, and Teach for All, who actually you can speak to the community of leaders who are surrounding us. Just take care of yourself and really get mentorship when it gets you down.
So important. Barbara?
Wow, I have too many lessons that I've learned. I have to think of one. I think, well, when we were starting Global Health Corps, it didn't exist. And I had another job, all my co-founders had other jobs, and luckily Echoing Green did invest in us so we could get started. But I remember at the time feeling, first of all, really young, and we just didn't have that many years of life underneath us, and yet we had this idea. And I think in our space and in just problem solving, we often have these ideas, but we talk ourselves out of doing them because it's scary. And yet I can't imagine if we hadn't started Global Health Corps. And my mom one day, I was on the phone with her and she said, you're talking about Global Health Corps more than you're talking about your actual job. What is the worst thing that could happen? What if you start this and people don't apply, well, at least you tried it. But if they do apply, this is an idea that could really change a field and change people's lives. And that's all I needed to hear, because it's true. What's the worst that can happen? And so many of us have ideas about social change or doing good, and yet they just sit on our to-do list. And that makes me sad, because they could all be very impactful.
Beautifully said. We always say fear means go. You just got to walk through the fear. I love it. Love it. Lonnie?
Well, I would say that, as like Barbara had said, being a young social entrepreneur, everything might be a little bit more difficult. Trying to attract a board of directors, convincing funders to trust an undergraduate student or recent graduate student with an idea they have of changing healthcare delivery in Lusaka, Zambia. But for me, probably the best advice I ever got was from Dr. Mitch Besser. He was the president of Mothers to Mothers. They have had a really innovative approach for how they train mothers who are diagnosed with HIV/AIDS to be peer educators, so they can provide support to other mothers who have been diagnosed. And he knew I liked sports, so he said fundraising and international development and nonprofit sectors like baseball. If you bat .300, you're going in the Hall of Fame. And for me, that was so true. I struck out a lot, whether it was attracting board members, presentations, fundraising, cold calls. But eventually, if you don't give up, if you're persistent, you love what you're doing, eventually people say yes. They believe in your cause, they're passionate about the same things you do, and you begin to see some success, and then it can snowball. And so, yeah, I don't know if I'm batting .300 yet, but...
I'm sure you're doing way better than that. Sales, sales, sales. So thank you. That's incredibly important advice. Donnel?
I think that I've learned that it's really important to be part of a community. I think echoing green certainly has been a great source of strength for me in difficult times personally and at the company. So thank you for that, Cheryl, and for your continued work cultivating that community. And I think that after you get 10 no's in a row on the fundraising trail, or in the moments of doubt, right, or when you get sick, and it is people from the community who can surround you with support. And I think the kind of the secret, right, of social entrepreneurship is that there's more of that, right? That there's more community. It's like a plane taking off, and there's one piece of air on top and two underneath. There's like a natural lift because so many people are excited about the changes that we're trying to make, that we have access to a broader community, and that's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing to discover.
Currency of social capital. Well said. Questions? I see a young lady's hand up back there.
Hello, thank you very much for your amazingly inspiring stories. My name is Hadia Shirazi. I just graduated 2 weeks ago from Columbia. I did it, I survived. During the past 2 years, I've been an ambassador for the One campaign and Girl Rising and World at School. So, every day I wake up and I face this hydra, which is climate change and sustainability and poverty and no education and no health. And every day I try to figure out how do we eventually kill the beast. And one of the things that I have to do almost on a daily basis is get in front of people and tell them to invest in humanity. And I find that kind of a really strange argument to make, to say that 3 million children every year die from something that's preventable, malnutrition. 8,000 children will die today because of it. By the time I'm done talking, 5 children would have died. We have over 50 million people that are going to be permanently stunted in sub-Saharan Africa every year. So you have generations that will never reach their potential. So I think my first question to you is, especially to, I think, Barbara and James, how do you get over the issue fatigue that sometimes you come across? And the second question is sort of a bigger picture view, because the UN has come out with all these statistics about how we're not gonna live in a gender equal world till maybe 2080. And my concern is that while we have a lot of women, and we have maybe more women in education, at teachers, at the level of community workers and teachers, we don't really have that equality further up the ladder. So when you're looking at real systemic change by systems that have failed generations of children, generations of women and girls, we don't have that equality there. So I worry all the time, because I make headway and then I run smack into a wall that says no. So how does someone like me wake up every day and look at that hydra and think that this can be done? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. I mean, to be honest, I have dreams myself when I wake up and I'm in cold sweat of actually what's going to happen to my country. I was at the Teach for America celebration for 25 years, and the people that came there, 15,000 people that showed up, and they were working in Auckland, Auckland, in LA, and all kinds of different communities, really transforming the education system. I visited schools where the Teach for America alums were mentoring children, and I saw collaboration type of learning, for example, young kids 6 years to 10 years old working together on a computer. And it started to dawn on me that a child in Bethany Primary School, where they don't even have a door, where they don't even have a window, for example, how could we have an equitable world? And so those are the challenges that dawn on me every single day. But not to repeat your question, when I go back home, is what I've learned is surround yourself with a people, with a community of people, like what they have said, that can help you realize the opportunities in those challenges, right? So Teach for All, for example, the network is incredible in helping you see that, but also with Barbara, thanks for being amazing. And she's come on my board because I said, I need someone who really understands it, and she's come around. But really are people that can help you see opportunities in those challenges. So one thing that I've seen, for example, in Uganda, there's an entire, as you know, we are the youngest in age nation in the world now. We've been named the #1 entrepreneurial country in the world entrepreneurial country in the world. I mean, every young person is trying to do something, but then those businesses never take off because there's no mentorship. So that inspires me every single day, that if I actually, someone said that to know that one life, it was Emerson, that one life has lived better because of your existence is to have succeeded. And so that reminds me that if I can tap into even just 2 or 3 or 4 and inspire those to actually lift that inspiration and take it to the next level, maybe I can say that's a little humbly that could be my success. I don't have to, transform the whole world. And that inspires me to see that there is that generation, that movement of young people trying to work on these things, and I want to be at the nexus of that.
Well, I mean, everything James and you said resonates, but at the same time, I mean, the fact that you're even bothered by this makes me know that the world is going to be okay. I mean, I want to cry, but I just think the fact that you're on a Monday night worried about everyone else in the world is a really beautiful thing. So you just need to know that. And the fact that any of y'all are here on a Monday night also makes me feel quite hopeful. So you just have to remember that. And I think it's hard looking at the numbers of the enormity of the issues that we're all working on, but people matter, and one of every number matters, and so that's why it's worth it. And luckily we're in a room where I think everyone came here so they agree, but I know it can be frustrating when you feel like you're the one person that's kind of like, y'all, doesn't this matter? Which is why, as James says, you need to surround yourself by people that also believe. I think that has been probably the greatest surprise and blessing of Global Health Corps, is that we have this community of 600 people who all of a sudden are like, James came to our Global Health Corps board meeting today, and all of our emails are like, hey, GHC fam, and we'll read those 2 weeks after our fellows met, and it's like they met 2 weeks ago and they're referring to each other as family, but you have to have each other's back, and you need to find people that have your back. And then on the gender equity thing, I'm saying this because we talked about this in Global Health Corps' board meeting today. 70% of our fellows are women. We're very competitive. 70% of our fellows are women, and we were talking to our board today around, is that actually a challenge? And meanwhile, our board, which is predominantly men, which is humorous because we're a fully female-led organization, our board was agreeing that actually we shouldn't change that because we need to see more and more women in leadership positions, and life happens and life gets in the way, and we need to be doing actually additional training for our female alums to navigate the issues that arise as a woman trying to get into positions of more influence and power. So we're working on it, but I hope everyone else is too.
Does Lonnie know anything to add? Or?
I just want to point out that she referenced Greek mythology, the Hydra, full circle. Good job.
Colombia thing.
Colombia thing. Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
Hi. Hi, James.
Hi, Amina.
Global Health. Okay. I'm a little nervous because I hate public speaking. So I have a favorite FDR quote, and I just think it's really cool that I'm here. And so I'm going to read it before I ask my question. And it goes, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we've provided enough for those who have too little." And I think truer words have never been spoken when I look at the 4 of you, and I know 3 out of the 4 of you fairly well. So first of all, Barbara, thank you, because I'm a former GHC fellow, and you definitely gave me wings in the stuff that I do today. So Cheryl, you keep using this word disruptive, so I'm going to piggyback off of that and ask a tough question to Barbara and Lonnie. So I'm going to say sorry first. Because it's something that comes up quite a bit, and after being a Global Health Corps fellow and knowing the model and living it, it's something that I often kind of push back against. But there was an article a few weeks back written by a Ugandan, actually, the title is very kind of provocative. It was, "Your white privilege is preventing or disrupting my progress," or something around that line. And a lot of comments were made, and I have my comments on that. But I want to know from the 2 of you specifically, you're millennials, and we live in this era of like Black Lives Matter. our voices, our stories, and going back to Africa movement type of a thing. And you two don't necessarily look like many of the communities you work in. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the challenges, has there been backlash against that? And have there been people who kind of question your model as a result of what you look like? And how do you navigate that challenge if that's something that continuously come up? Lonnie, you mentioned working ourselves out of a job, and if you can't even get in the first place because of the way you look, then how do you go where those needs are? Yeah.
That's a great question. She's a Global Health Corps alum, and she's amazing. Well, I think so part of Global Health Corps' model that I didn't really touch on is that our fellows are from around the world. They always work in teams of 2, one from the country where they're working partnered with an international fellow. And that was intentional. If we're working on global health issues, it needs to be a global group of young leaders. And our model is very future looking. We're working with young talent now, investing in the change that they will make throughout their careers. And so it needs to be a global group of young people that are working across cultures, across sectors, across borders, and sharing what's working or not working. And part of the reason that our model is that way is exactly as to what you're saying. And it's something that you said too, talent is everywhere. And so our model would never have been one that only worked with Americans. That wasn't part of the solution. We're trying to build up find great talent and invest in it everywhere that we work, because that's what the world looks like. So Teddy Rouge, who wrote that article, speaks at Global Health Corps training to our fellows, and he poses this same kind of idea to our fellows every year. And that we all have to be really aware of what we're doing in this space, and are we causing more harm or are we causing positive outcomes? And I think that is where the challenge can lie, is not even being aware of what you're doing in this space and how you operate in it.
For me, a big part was going into it with a high level of humility and knowing what I know and what I don't, and that I learned more every single day from the community members and the stakeholders than they've probably ever learned from me. And a philosophy for us as an organization is to lead from behind. And our goal is to have as minimal presence or visible presence as we can in the communities that we work in, and to work with local partners in partnership with schools and health centers so that community members view the school and the health center as a service provider. And instead we're just providing technical support and capacity building so that they're able to implement this model that they were involved with every step to design. And so for us, when it goes to working ourselves out of a job, when we eventually leave a community, the community members don't see anything has changed, because it's the teachers, it's the health workers, it's the clinic, the schools that are the heroes, and we're very much in the backside, behind the scenes. And so for us, it's, I guess, trying to empower as much as you can and focusing on partnership.
I'm Frank Strasburger, and I'm vice chair of Lonnie's board. And I just want to throw something into this conversation that I really appreciated, that some of you probably saw. DeRay McKesson was on Stephen Colbert. DeRay, of course, is one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter. And this whole question of privilege came up. And Stephen Colbert innocently said, but, yeah, I'm privileged, but what am I supposed to do about it? Well, of course, in a way, that's the question. We can't help being privileged, those of us who are. And DeRay, I think, incredibly wisely said, use your privilege to empower others. And in a way, that's what you said, Barbara. We have to be aware of what it is we're doing in the spaces we're operating in, and often we aren't. So we keep having to make sure that we're actually empowering others.
Yeah, it's challenging. I'm an Ivy Leaguer. I grew up poor, but I'm not poor anymore. And I think, even though I'm black, these are issues, right, that are really important and kind of impact and influence the work that all of us do. I think, there's an argument against the whole field of social entrepreneurship as a whole, right? That you know, we're like young kids, we're millennials, we're idealistic, we parachute into places, we're gone in 5 years, if that. And in the best of times, we don't do a whole lot of damage, but the truth is that we take more out of the communities in terms of experiences and lessons that we learn than in other places. I think that we're all on a learning curve. I don't think that social entrepreneurship is going away. I think that it comes out of a set of values that we, and I'm an old millennial too, we millennials really share. We're not gonna run the world in the same way that you guys did. No disrespect. I think that it's gonna be very different. I think that in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of sexuality, we've really crossed the Rubicon, and there's a lot of culture wars that we're still reading about in the presidential race that we just don't care about at all, right? And I do think that there's gonna be a new set of structures, and I look forward to the day when we run all the structures. No disrespect.
Any final comments? I see that. Final comments. Thank you.
My name is Betty King, and I was the U.S. ambassador to the World Health Organization in Geneva. So this is very interesting to me. The big issue that you know, I focused on there, and even now that I've left, is this question of childhood obesity, which, as you know, is tied up a lot in the health issues. So I want to sort of prod you. You're doing great work, but it seems to me we need some more integration between the childhood obesity thing. I just finished this round the world tour for the World Health Organization, and I was astounded, even though I grew up in a tiny country in the Caribbean where, you know, I'm seeing people obese for the first time. Across the globe, it is a real problem. And we all know how that problem got worse. It's all our, you know, soft drinks producers and all those kinds of things. And so we bear some of the responsibility. But it would seem to me that a wonderful program that you all described, and happy to hear about it, would be a perfect intersect with what we're doing at the World Health Organization. Because, you know, if you're going to have these really overweight kids who could barely walk, who don't exercise, they're not going to live very long. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me if we could connect to something as interesting as you are doing, that we both could benefit. You know, both sides could benefit from this. I already having great ideas that Madam Chan, who is now the head of the World Health Organization, she retires at the end of this year, as does Michelle Obama. These are two women who are really on to this issue of obesity. And unless we address that, we won't be talking about schools, because kids won't be able to go to school. They're so huge and not learning well when they're that obese. So I just wanted to put that in the mix, and certainly happy to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Sounds good.
And there is a reception following these moments, so you'll have the opportunity to talk to these extraordinary young leaders and hopefully make connections for those of you who are doing work in areas like childhood obesity and others. Linda, are we turning it over to you?
Yes, we're turning it over to me to thank these wonderful entrepreneurs for the work they're doing. Thank you so much. This was a truly inspiring program. And as Cheryl said, we have a reception upstairs if you want to talk to them. And I encourage you to do it. I'm going to make a beeline for it. So beat me upstairs, right in the Four Freedoms room right above. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well done.
Well done.